Good evening. I'm Julián Zugazagoitia, Executive Director of the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, and on behalf of our trustees and our staff, I'm delighted to welcome all of you tonight for this first event, our symposium in association with a great exhibition that I hope you have all seen, Echoes, Islamic Art and Contemporary Artist. As you can see from the slide behind me, well, that's me, and now this is... We have really an amazing lineup of artists and speakers participating in this symposium tonight and tomorrow. I hope that you will not only be inspired by today's performance, but that you will come back tomorrow to engage in all of the ideas that these panelists will be sharing. So it is really going to be a fascinating series of presentations and conversations that will delve from historic Islamic art to all the way to contemporary practices. The title of the symposium, as you can see, is Translations, and it is a especially fitting description on the presentation that you will see tonight. Iraqi artist Hayv Kahraman, just as complicated as Zugazagoitia, but you know, it's about translation, it's about learning each other's pronunciations. But Dave will kick it off, the symposium, with a performance through multiple voices, inspired in her own life experiences as an immigrant and how those experiences come across different cultures and informs her art. The themes presented in her performance are extremely relevant to all of us. They include globalization, the diaspora, how cultures shape gender, identity. Another aspect of globalization played very well and a very interesting way in generating and realizing this project, and in the ease of communication that the 21st century allows to have. While Hayv created this script and the performance at her home in California, she posted a casting call for Kansas City performance online. Hayv interviewed potential participants through her computer, and they rehearsed their parts via Skype before meeting for the first time here in person. So there is something truly global about this project, and truly also 21st century, allowing for all of this communication and this cyber encounters that are so much more meaningful once they are realized in person. So you will see that despite Skype technology and everything, this presentation is very personal, very intimate, and I've heard that yesterday's rehearsals really blew a lot of people's minds. I'm sure that we're in for something very special. But before we start, I want to end up by thanking everyone who has made this possible, and in particular to thank the Retta Sosland Fund and H&R Block for their support. I also wish to thank the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art for their generous and very early support of this initiative and all its programs. The Nelson-Atkins also worked with community partners to create programs focused upon Islamic art and cultures across Kansas City. Thanks to our partners, including the Kansas City Art Coalition, the Kansas City Public Library, the Friends of the Chamber of Music, and the Festival of Faith series for all of their support and collaboration. Also, this is a great moment to announce that shortly in the spring, sometime late in April, we will be also opening a very important exhibition called Roads of Arabia, and it is an exhibition that features 5,000 years of history. So the Arabic Peninsula was not known for having a lot of archaeological materials, and in the last 4 decades, incredible amounts of discoveries have been made. We will be one of the few cities in the US, after its first premiered in Paris at the Louvre, this exhibition comes to us, and we'll be seeing from 5,000 years stelas that look like a Brancusi or like a Cycladic idol, a bit more geometric, all the way to seeing the influence actually of the Hellenistic world or the Romantic world, all the way to Islamic art. And one of the greatest features that we have the doors, the original medieval doors of the Kiba in Mecca. So it is really highlights of art that we'll be having. And all of that, this exhibition Echoes and also the following exhibition I just mentioned, Roads of Arabia, would not be possible if it were not for the great dedication and talent of our own curator, Kim Massler, for which I want to thank all of her endeavors, and also to the entire staff of the museum and the people like Adam Johnson in public programs that make all of this seem so seamlessly. So now let's dim the lights and begin tonight's evening performance. Thank you.
Let me share with you my memories. I remember once when my dad was driving in downtown Baghdad and we passed a narrow street that led into a larger square. I was in the front seat of the car and pointed up towards the demolished building and asked him, what happened? There was a foggy air around this once tall building, now half its size, that made me recall the many dust storms that occupied the city every now and then. It's because of the Iran-Iraq war, he said with a low voice as we turned around the corner. That was the first time I had seen destruction of that magnitude. I remember clinging to my mother in the basement of my uncle's house in Soleimania in northern Iraq. I remember my relatives curled around candles, waiting for the loud noises outside to stop. Despite my fear, a sense of solidarity prevailed. I was surrounded by my family, and somehow I felt protected as we all sang and played games in the dark. When the noises stopped, I used to go out to play with my friends in the hopes of collecting the most bullet shells or the biggest bullet shell to impress my peers. Somewhat golden in color and quite beautiful, I remember thinking. Then, suddenly, the loud sirens went off. I learned years later that it was the Thunderbolt 7000 to be precise. It was so loud you had to cover your ears and run. These howling sounds shook me to the very core, yet they were part of my childhood. Now they serve as a memory that both jolts me to the ground and reminds me of my vulnerable past. I left everything behind. The house my father built, my school, my toys, my friends. These works are generated from a feeling of losing my childhood and the selling of my home in Baghdad. This was difficult for me because I attributed that home with a tangible space, a space that encapsulated memories I did not want to lose. My childhood memories were interrupted because of war. I had carved my story onto those walls, literally so, as I had used 4 walls of an entire room as my canvas, filling them with characters, narratives, jokes, and discoveries. An archive of my youth that is now lost. When it was sold, a part of me faded. We tried to hold on to it as long as we could, but there were issues. My father has 2 daughters, and we wouldn't have been able to inherit the house. The laws in Iraq made it difficult for the female member of the family to inherit a property. So, there was a large possibility that it would have had to go to the next closest male in the family. It's also located close to the airport, where sectarian violence is high, as there had been a few shootings around the location, as well as on the property itself. Of course, there is the question of ever returning or relocating, but this was always dismissed. Each panel work is based on aerial views of Iraqi domestic homes with courtyards, some still standing, some not. The act of tracing these lines on the panels makes me feel that I'm somewhat archiving and preserving a history. Every line I paint corresponds to a tangible structure, a wall, a door, a room that was once inhabited and had a narrative in its own right. It might even still be there. I also sometimes imagine myself as an archaeologist, digging and tracing these lines to research and recover a past and perhaps a connection with it. I then started researching residential structures within the Arab world, which are engineered to segregate the sexes and to conceal the private from the public. These houses are also broken up into successive hierarchical sections that herald increasing degrees of semi-private and semi-public spaces, and intermediary spaces where the boundaries are blurred, such as alleys, stairways, corridors, screens, etc. I also decided to explicitly use courtyard homes, which are built for and towards the inside, overlooking a central open courtyard, providing a little patch of private sky that the inhabitants have in their homes and can claim as their own. It's also a semi-public space that is structured in a way to receive male guests, while the female members of the family conceal themselves behind mashrabiyya screens or shanashil in Iraqi dialect, usually located on the second floor surrounding the courtyard. I decided to delineate the courtyard space from the rest of the rooms by introducing a pattern. In some ways, I feel that the pattern creates order and generates an organized system that the work needs. Perhaps it's also a personal impulse of mine to obsessively avoid chaos. And it does take me back to days of war. The repetitive nature of the pattern reminded me of the ornate mashrabiyya screens and made me feel that I was painting a perforated door into each painting. It almost acted as an intermediary doorway leading into another space. As the work progressed, I realized that I was somewhat part of these disjointed spaces, and perhaps this is what drew me to them in the first place. The tall, white walls of my studio reinforced my submergence inwards into a private space. The figures are all extensions of my own body as I photograph myself and use these images to produce the figures. They are repeated over and over again in the work as a form of assertion and affirmation. They are painted transparently on the brown panels, somewhat resembling ghosts that are neither here nor there. You see, as an immigrant or refugee, I found that the best method to survive is to imitate, and maybe I did it too well, as I sometimes feel like being in between two worlds. Body screen is an installation work that is constructed of shapes taken from a three-dimensional scan of my body. This was done by a performative act of a laser scanner, rotating along the perimeters of my nude body, producing more than 80 scans. The body was then sectioned, partitioned into the lattice screen and placed in between two rooms of the gallery. As an observer, you only had access to the works inside that room by peeking through this patterned screen. In the Arab region, these mashrabiyya or shanashil screens serve as a curious mix of technology, cultural dictations, and an ornamental design. Functionally, the mashrabiyya or lattice screen is a brilliant eco-friendly solution to the problems of regulating air and temperature within a structure, while providing protection from the sun. It also creates an avenue for women to observe the men as well as the outside world from the privacy of their own homes. It's a way to see without being seen, creating an ambiguity within the dynamic of voyeurism. The women, in this case, can watch the men in secrecy, putting them in a pseudo-position of power as they themselves become passive spectators. So, unlike the traditional place of the domesticated woman passively observing the outside world, this work confronted the viewer in a direct way and unveiled the feminine body by affirming her agency and breaking the mastering gaze.
Let me share with you my memories. I remember it was pitch black outside, and our car was finally packed. As we drove away, I could see my grandmother in the back window tossing water from a glass behind the car for good luck, as if that small glass of water would purify our journey through the night. That is when everything changed. And I somehow knew I'd never be able to return home again. We had hired a smuggler to take us to a faraway land where it's safe. I remember when we reached Stockholm, Arlanda, the airport in Sweden, my mom took my sister and I to the bathroom, ripped our passports into small shreds, and flushed them down the toilet. The bits and pieces rose above the rippled water for a few seconds before sinking in and then disappearing very quickly in a whirlwind. "Follow me," she said, as she walked us to the immigration desk. It was around 3:30 in the afternoon, and my sister and I had to wait outside in the playroom while my mother talked to the police. I looked outside the window, and it was pitch black again. Here I started my new life as a war refugee, marked by my black hair and my brown skin among tall blonde kids in my class. This is what my identity has become, a refugee. I had to learn the tricks of the trade. I was this peculiar creature walking in the desert snow of Sweden. But when they spoke to me, they became assured and comforted, because I had made it a point to master their tongue. I was able to cover myself and be in disguise, at least phonetically. Yes, I did assimilate, I did adapt, and I did try my best to imitate them. Maybe they would see me as one of them if I acted more like them and forgot my old self. And I did forget for a while. But it wasn't much later when I realized that bleaching my skin and my hair and perfecting my accent weren't going to help. No matter how hard I tried to erase myself, I'd always be the other person who carried her native home with her. I'll always be the refugee. Warak is the Arabic word for playing cards. Warak is a very personal group of works, as they are based primarily on matters my family and I have encountered. I wanted to combine the idea of a scattered deck of cards with the experience of 5 million displaced Iraqis. Did you know that 5 million people amounts to 20% of the entire population of Iraq? Not only is 5 million a staggering number, but the loss of 20% of Iraq's population has crippled the country, as most of these refugees encompass doctors, scientists, and teachers, the building blocks of a functioning community. And here I was, one of them, in Sweden. As I looked around me, I saw my father, once a revered linguistics professor at the University of Baghdad, now struggling to find a job, as nobody would hire a non-native Swede to teach English in schools. Migrant 8 is a representation of an uprooted character, where the narratives of past and present are intertwined in one space. His life in the homeland versus his life as an immigrant intercross, and the dilemma of conflicting traditions, customs, and language arise. Once a wealthy man, now a clown, as his most esteemed equality was lost and the tedious rebuilding of life needed to begin again. Plagued by the turbulence of dislocation, Migrant 1 addresses the austere state of mental versus physical pain. Although separated in composition and the mirrored figures, at once self and other, past and present, are actively interlinked by a gesture of embracement and relinquishment. Migrant 11 is a contorted dancer in reference to the deformation of self due to migration. This is, in a more concrete way, directly taken from my personal past. Dance, specifically ballet, was one of my ambitions when growing up, as I attended the music and ballet school in central Baghdad. When I fled to Sweden, I enrolled in classes again. I remember several times when the teacher separated me from the rest of the Swedish girls because of my color. So I decided to leave. It's a self-portrait of sorts, dealing with the emotive aspects of physical and psychological disfigurement. Migrant 3 is actively cutting her tongue. She represents the cultural loss of language and communication within the host culture, as many struggle to learn and reconfigure their tongues to grapple with their basic needs. Migrant 9 depicts one among many widowed women whose only recourse to survive is to sell her body. An interesting link I found when doing research is a deck of cards named the Archaeology Awareness Playing Cards. They were distributed by the American Army to troops in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2007. These 40,000 copies were designed to make US troops aware of the damage they can cause to historical sites in those areas and to discourage illegal trade in artifacts. Al-Malwiya is based on the spiral minaret in Samarra, which was built during the Abbasid Empire between 848 to 852 AD. It is considered an important historical site in Iraq and the world because of its unique architectural style, and because it was the largest of its kind when built. Little souvenirs and paintings of the structure are found in shops around Iraq, not too different from the millions of souvenir pyramids you'd find in Egypt. Not only is the Malwiya a significant archaeological emblem, it also reminds me of the times we used to visit Samarra in the early 90s. I remember thinking it looked like an extension of the desert, rising high above the ground, wrapping its body around itself like a snail. We would climb climb the first and second spirals and look down onto the miniature people below. Several of Iraq's archaeological sites have suffered because of the war, and the Malwiya was one of them. In 2005, the minaret was used as the lookout point for US troops, as it was the highest point in the city of Samarra. Consequently, the top spiral was damaged in a fire exchange with Iraqi insurgents. As I was reading about this news from my comfortable and safe home in the West, I couldn't fathom why and how this piece of history was being disregarded. The installation of Al-Malwiya is built from 1,800 playing cards that are reproductions of the above-mentioned series, Warak, depicting displaced Iraqi refugees. The cards are sewn together forming a collective curtain. Like a whirlwind, the pieces hang as a reversed spiral, with the bottom, smallest spiral, erupts as if it were hit by a missile.
Let me share with you my memories. I remember looking outside the car window, seeing a mirage and thinking how similar this country is to mine. Yet, here I was, riddled with guilt and frustration about buying my groceries at Target. I was set to move again, but this time further away, to a country that is currently at war with my own. To a country that I never thought I'd step foot in, even though I spoke its language, and felt somewhat familiar with its culture. You see, growing up in Baghdad, I attended an international American school, so English and Arabic were equally integrated into my vocabulary. As I fled to Sweden after the First Gulf War, the American media had, and still has, its presence ingrained in the culture. It was as if I was being followed, from Iraq to Sweden to Italy, and now to the United States. But this was different. This time, something happened within my identity as a woman. One day, I started drawing a figure. I played around with this figure, and slowly, she started emerging. It was all very natural, as if I've known her for a while. As if she'd always been there, but had never surfaced. That day she finally did. She gave me a voice to speak about her. She told me that she was hung in the name of honor. I didn't understand. What did she mean? Her brother interjected and said she was raped and became pregnant. She has brought shame to our family, and my father and I had to restore and protect that honor. But that's not all self-immolation. She'd rather pour kerosene on her body, pick up a match that she normally uses for cooking, and ignite herself. Many women within the Kurdish burn units are suicidal attempts. These are women just like you and me. At the time, I was one of them, but I didn't know that I was. It was easier to speak about her than to look at my own life. Yes, I was asleep, and deeply so. But they, these figures, these women, paved an outlet that my deepest self needed to uncover. I needed a change, a violent change. I wanted to shed my skin and toss it in the trash and never look back again, in hopes that a new skin would eventually grow. I wanted to constrain it, to confine it, to restrict it to this rectangle. After all, that's what I was used to. I was a worn body being beat to the ground. That is when I introduced skin into my work. It's rawhide, the cow, skin, dehaired, washed, and soaked in lime. It was sent to me neatly folded in a box. Interestingly, this material was once a part of a living organism that moved and breathed, yet now is fully detached, dead and fixed, not in flux anymore. There's something very eerie and intriguing about working with skin. I actually got it shipped to me frozen from Texas. Opening the boxes was always a surprise because each hide is different, and each one acts as a historical fact sheet for the animal, for where it has been, or of what significant encounters that have left marks on its skin. Some of them are also branded with numbers, which introduces a whole box of inquiries. That's a lot of preparatory work involved after receiving the skin. I first soak it thoroughly in water, then it's stretched, dyed, and left to dry. It's an interesting process as the skin changes when it dries. It contracts, gets thinner, and changes color. And the level in which it does this depends on the area of the skin. For example, the stomach contracts more because it's more flexible. It makes me think of a photographer in a dark room developing an image that magically appears after soaking it in chemicals. Of course, the sense of violence the skin transmits creates an array of hidden narratives that precedes it. The skin is now marked, reduced to a number, static, and confined to these very narrow parameters within the rectangular frame. Who did the skin belong to? Where has it been? And why is it inanimate now? 6 women extracting a cross-sectional slice of their bodies encompasses the gallery space. Each woman becomes a manifestation of a crossbreed, hinting to the affinity of dismembered bodies, with fragmented geographical locations. It's a crude act, this detaching of a limb. The shape of each slice is derived from the digital, 3-dimensional scan of my body that was then cross-sectioned into 1/4-inch horizontal slices. What is expected to be seen as the inside of the body in each slice, such as organs, bones, tissue, etc., is in fact exchanged with skin, or more specifically, rawhide. The inside then transforms into the outside, where the skin, a protective shell that once engulfed a living species, is now in the forefront. I wanted to reverse these roles and blur the boundaries of dichotomous thought, of mind, body, self, other, public, private, and masculine, feminine. I needed to extract my body, to dismantle it, to fragment it. It was the only way to wake myself up. As I stood there, my nude body being photographed by a man operating the scanning device, I felt a loss of agency, a resignation and submission that made me somehow feel domesticated, comfortable, and familiar. The results of looking at my body through a computer screen were cathartic. She became a surface to dissect and divide and to analyze. She needed to be sectioned, and the sections then reconfigured and nested onto another space, an icosahedron, a structure with the highest form of symmetry, as said within Western Euclidean geometry. But it's also a 3-dimensional structure that was used by scientist Buckminster Fuller to project the world map on. The addition of each one of these horizontal body slices would form a whole. The violent and nonchalant aspect of plane sectioning a body speaks to a similar detached and separation which occur within the diasporic peoples. But it was also something I needed to do as a woman. The depiction of these cross-sections eliminated social within the body for me, and reduced it to mere function, object, and flesh. It erased the embodied socio-cultural experiences that I feel are contingent on our perception and view of the world. And so, I needed to cleanse my body with water and scrub it down. I needed to erase my old body, and I needed to restore and rebuild it after waking up. Never will I let myself sleep as my brown skin grows back again. Am I a commodity? Are my paintings and figures a commodity? I pose in the nude and photograph my body to use as outlines for paintings. My figures are then visual transitions of my own body. Are they then buying my body? The figures are rendered to fit Occidental pleasures, white flesh, transparent flesh, posing in compositions directly taken from the Renaissance, conforming to what they think is ideal, neglecting everything else, colonizing my own body to then be displayed gracefully into my rectangular panels, carnal and visceral palpability. I provide for you in my rectangles. I know you like it. That's why I paint it. To catch your gaze, to activate your gaze. I want you to buy me so you can look at me all day long. I'm your little oriental pussycat. You can pet me if you'd like.
Thank you, Hayv, and to all of you. That was a fantastic performance and a wonderful way to kick off our translation symposium. So now, Julian Sugozagoitia and I would like to invite all of you out into the lobby where you can visit with the artist and performers for a few minutes, and you can ask her your questions, your personal provocations that she raised in her performance. So please welcome Hayv, and welcome to all of you, and we'll take the next part of the performance outside.